Hello, shalom, and welcome to another episode of Community Relations Corner, where we discuss issues of concern to New York's Jewish community and our friends and partners all over the city. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and the CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC-NY, and on each episode of the Community Relations Corner, we're joined by guests representing the political, religious, economic, and diverse community leadership in New York, many of whom I had the honor and pleasure of getting to know over the course of my tenure at JCRC. And together we'll discuss current events impacting New York's Jewish community and its neighbors, as well as the state of our city, the state of our state, the state of the nation, and at times the state of the world. Today, we have a very special program. It's our pre-Passover, our pre-Pesach episode to reflect on Passover during a pandemic, during a plague. Joining me today are our three colleagues. I'll start with Rabbi Rachel Ain, who is from the Sutton Place Synagogue, a conservative rabbi in Midtown East in Manhattan. And then we go to Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch from the Stephen Wise Free Synagogue, a Reform rabbi from the Upper West Side, and Rabbi Elie Weinstock from the Jewish Center of Atlantic Beach, an Orthodox rabbi in Nassau County. And before I said city, I don't mean the city, I mean the metropolis. It includes, we have an office out in Nassau County, so we're very, very inclusive. I'm really, really thrilled to have not only three colleagues, but also three friends for this conversation. And we're going to start with COVID-19 and its impact on being Jewish, on Judaism, on Jewish life. So how have your congregations adapted during the period of this pandemic, and particularly your role as a rabbi in essence without a pulpit for the most part? Again, you can explain as you wish. But once again, the adaptation of all of us who have been attending synagogue for the vast majority of our lives, and all of a sudden get struck by a pandemic. So we'll start again with Rabbi Aim.
So this has certainly been a fascinating year. I would say that it hasn't been a year without a pulpit. The pulpit and its platform has just been shifted. And as I've explained to the congregation, we never closed. We just adjusted how we shared our message. And for us, so for the past 14 and a half months, or 12 and a half months, excuse me, feels longer, the past 12 and a half months, we made the decision for the majority of our services to be virtual, but the virtual services have been real and meaningful and spiritual and engaging. So we have our daily minyanim, morning and evening, where we've actually tripled in size with regard to attendance. We've reached so many more people who are both local and beyond, who are looking for an egalitarian and traditional daily minyan. So that's been really expansive and exciting to see how the daily service and the ritual of daily prayer has impacted people's lives. Our Shabbat services originally we did in one form online. Now we've made them even longer, but we weren't reading Torah at first. Now we do read Torah, albeit virtually. Our B'nai Mitzvah are small, but in person. And hopefully soon enough, we'll start reopening our doors in a safe and meaningful way. But it's been quite a year. We have expanded our programming and our reach and our commitment to bringing Judaism to people who are seeking it.
So thank you very much, Rabbi Hirsch. Have you had the same experience? Have your if you've gone virtual, have your attendance of participants, of congregants increased? I can say that from a not-for-profit perspective, that we have many more people coming to our board meetings that are virtual on Zoom, as opposed to coming into an office wherever we might hold them. Rabbi Hirsch?
Yes, we have seen a substantial and dramatic increase in people who are connecting with us online. Maybe down the road in this conversation, we can discuss what the meaning of that is, what the significance of that is. I'm not sure that's all good news. I think it's mixed news, but we have seen that. We were, of course, completely virtual for the first 6 months when everything was locked down. But given my perspective that it is really, really important, synagogues really need to be personal, interactive relationships. We determined very early on that when it was safe and under those safe conditions, we would try and reopen, which we have. So since September, we've been open every Erev Shabbat service, every Shabbat morning. We've had full B'nai Mitzvah throughout. Our schools are open, by the way, our preschools and our religious schools. We have very, very significant health and safety protocols. To the best of our knowledge, and we feel very confident of this because otherwise we would have known if it were different. Nobody has been infected in our building, and nobody has transmitted infection by virtue of being in our building. So, but it's not the same. Of course, we're looking forward to the day that we'll be on the other side of this pandemic, because in the end, synagogues need to be in your face, one-to-one, personal relationships, that we are the institution that embodies the community at large. So everything we're doing now is the best we can, but it's not a replacement. It's augmenting what we need to do. It's not a replacement.
Thank you, Rabbi Hirsch. Rabbi Weinstock, we've heard from two city rabbis, and you spent a good part of your career as a city rabbi too, but there you are now out in the hinterlands in Nassau County. Is there any, as well as being an Orthodox synagogue, we've heard from the conservative reform movement, now we're looking at the Orthodox movement, what shades of difference might there be between their experience and your experience?
Sure. So first, Zoom. I think that's the buzzword of the day. You know, someone sends me a link for a different application. I'm like, what's that? As you mentioned, I'm one of the refugees from the city during this pandemic. I moved out to Long Island only December 23rd. So I got a full season plus of adapting in the city, and certainly quieter out in Nassau County. But the challenge posed by your question remains. You mentioned the idea of a rabbi without a pulpit, and my friend and colleague Rabbi Ain said it's an adaptation of the role of rabbi, an adaptation of the pulpit. What comes to mind for me is a comment of a colleague of mine when dealing with high holiday seating, which was something that rabbis didn't have to navigate as much, sometimes for the better this past year. And the expression she coined was, it's the prayer, not the chair. And, try telling that to someone who gets ousted from their high holiday seat, but we are a faith-based organization. The idea of the prayer, not the chair, the rabbi without the pulpit, the spirituality and the engagement without the synagogue, that has defined my experience during this period of time. Going virtual meant a lot, as it did in many congregations in terms of Kabbalat Shabbat and the like. As an Orthodox synagogue, we did not have Zoom or make use of those media during Shabbat or the holidays. It created a whole new category of engagement of pre-Kabbalat Shabbat, which with people not spending as much time at work or being as anchored to hours, meant a lot of people also participating. I think, like everyone, the numbers increase. You don't really know what they're doing behind their camera shut off, but you certainly have the numbers. And so it's been a period of trying to maintain a certain level of engagement, trying to bring to the people as much as possible that they can't get in shul. But also, like Rabbi Hirsch mentioned, not to lose sight of that. This is great, but it's still not enough. And in particular, the challenges of not being able to connect on Shabbat and holidays because of the Orthodox practice, it created complicating scenarios, and sometimes the need to do things a little bit differently when it meant, for example, some rabbis carrying phones so they could be reached at a moment's notice because of especially in the height of the pandemic a year ago. It also led to, throughout the Orthodox community, certainly less so in the city, but more so in the suburbs, of the backyard congregation or the outdoor minyan, or people trying to create or recreate some of what they're missing in person on their own in a as safe and socially distant and way as possible. Which I think is something else deserves attention. How sometimes the onus of participation in observance and meaning and spirituality turned inward to the individuals and the family dynamic when they couldn't rely on the synagogue.
Yeah, but as a former public rabbi myself, so much is really the one-on-one, and what substitute, Rabbi Hirsch, what substitute has there been for you in terms of that one? I mean, as an example, do you still make, if you were doing before, do you still make hospital visits? We'll set aside condolence visits for another question, but and just the normal course of your role as a rabbi, how has that changed during the course of the pandemic, and have you adapted some other way of approaching it?
Well, there is no other way other than technology, other than the virtual technology. If you're not going to be in people's presence, there's no other way to be present except for virtual technology. And I don't think we fully absorbed yet the enormous damage that this period will have caused individuals and communities. And I think the full processing will begin to take place only after we've come out of this, and then we look around and we try and process what we've actually gone through.
What damage, Rabbi Hirsch, do you anticipate?
First of all, enormous emotional damage.
Right.
If you would like, I can spell out what I think are some of the institutional ramifications for all of us, by the way, not only synagogues, but for the organized Jewish community. But enormous emotional damage. We've had, I'm sure my colleagues have all had the same experience. We've had mourners, deceased who have died alone, and mourners who have mourned alone. Throughout, of course, we met at cemeteries for interments, but no gatherings for funerals and no shivas, no hospital visits. And so this whole thing will have, I believe, when it's all over, will have left a huge, open, emotional wound that will take a long time to heal. I actually believe that on the other side of this, that's when the synagogues will be especially important for people to try and rebuild our Jewish psyche, our emotions, but also the community at large.
So thank you, Rabbi Hirsch. Rabbi Ain, how have you, I'm sure that you're experiencing something very similar to what Rabbi Hirsch has described. So what approach have you taken for dealing, let's say, with families in periods of grief, where particularly at the height of the pandemic, where it was so difficult to have any human contact, how has the rabbinical role been adapted and compensated for the lack of touch?
So I think that when I was speaking before about the daily minyan, that has been one of these moments where some of the mourners in my congregation who might not have been able or not have chosen to be able to come to daily minyan every day have been able to do so, and they have been incredibly lifted up by clergy presence and the presence of the community and the impact of tradition and going through the ins and outs of a full year together in prayer, not just saying Kaddish, but the way we crafted and constructed the tefillah, the prayer experience. So in some ways, I do feel that people might have gotten more spirituality because this technology was made available to them. I'm not saying that that's something to just rely on, but given the situation and how lonely and isolating the first 7 days were in terms of death, burial, and mourning, and the complete pain of not being together in Shiva, the ability to be together to say Kaddish, I think for some of my community has been incredibly gratifying. So I've seen that. One area that I think we don't talk a lot about, we talk about schools. Our nursery school's open, and like Rabbi Hirsch, I'm so proud that we've had 0 community spread. So proud, and like really, we've been doing the protocols very well. Our religious school has remained virtual. We made the decision to do it that way, and it's been going very well virtually, despite what virtual can do. But what we're missing out on is the Shabbat experience of kids in shul and getting accustomed to that. My own son is becoming bar mitzvah in a few weeks. And
wow.
I know that in a normal year, you know, whether they're hanging out in the lobby, the classrooms, the coat rooms, or trying to get a bagel before shul ends, like the buzz of kids together in shul is part of how you learn the service through osmosis. And my own kids go to day school and they're learning it. But I think that not having kids in shul on Shabbat in the same way, because while I'm leading, it's not the same as when my whole family's coming with me to the sanctuary. If I'm leading from home, it's just a different experience for them. And that's something else that I think in 2, 3, 4 years, 10 years, I'll be really curious to see where the teens of today are in terms of their Jewish engagement. Whereas I'm not so concerned in that case about the 2, 3, and 4-year-olds. There's other things, but I'm really curious to see where our middle school kids will be in years to come for communities. And I imagine all of our communities care deeply about the engagement of children.
Right. Well, it goes across all of the ages, and the seniors, the adults, the children, the little children, particularly the bar mitzvah and bat mitzvah experience. I have a grandson who unfortunately was not able to be with his friends at an appropriate minyan for his bar mitzvah. It was extremely difficult. So how, Rabbi Weinstock, have you dealt with it within your synagogue, and particularly as Rabbi indicated, her children are going to day school, of not having that experience of being together with all of your friends, and coming to shul, to synagogue, to temple on Shabbat. How have teens actually, reword the question, have you had any conversations with teens as opposed to their parents and grandparents?
Well, I live with a few of them, so there's that added advantage. Or I should say, I live with them doesn't mean I speak with them. That's also what happens when you're the parent of a teen. But I would say, look, there's a lot of similar experiences, because the challenge is really, you know, across the board in being locked down and being socially distant and being separate. I think that on some level the circle has narrowed. You know, very often, you know, in these life cycle events, it's very wide in terms of, you know, think of funerals we've participated in that are going out the door, and everyone is connected, but it's a little more tangential. You know, you don't always connect the same way with every single person in the room. And here, the circle is much smaller in terms of who can physically be present, and even the methods of connection virtually are hard. I confess that I can't stand Zoom Shivas. Just you're looking at a screen, it's like a little bit like the Brady Bunch, and you're not sure who's going to talk and where it's going to be. To me, it's just very uncomfortable. And I think that at the same time, it has been the outlet that's necessary for mourners to participate that way. So I think that there's a certain, the circle is getting smaller, and the people those experiencing life cycles, anywhere on the spectrum, cradle to grave, you have the bris, which has a moel, and you know, the father is doing all these blessings and serving a sandik in ways that didn't exist because there's no one else there, or whether it be Pidyon Haben, how do you get the Kohen? How do you transfer the coins?
Right.
Bar mitzvah, bat mitzvah, all of these chuppahs that are taking place during this time. It has created a new way that the individuals who are the celebrants are connecting. On some level, that's brought people to turn more inward. And I think that that impacts their religious lives as well. But certainly from a social emotional realm, we are leaning much more on those who we can have that access with.
Right. So back to Rabbi Ain about turning inward. I'm going to ask all three of you. Do you think that religious observance during the course of this year plus pandemic has increased, decreased, or has it remained the same? Rabbi Ain?
I would say religious awareness has increased.
Okay.
I think, I don't think it's decreased. I think what we have found is that the people who were invested in being a part of the Jewish community or a Jewish community in some ways and were already a bit primed for it, were able to go the distance this year in a much deeper way than they might have in the past. And that's been incredibly fulfilling. I am sure that for people who were nominally connected, and I don't mean from an observance standpoint, but that they might have lost some of the ties that have connected them, especially if they weren't at a transitional life cycle moment or they didn't have a moment happen to them. But I don't know yet. I think that goes back to what Rabbi Hirsch said. I think it's going to take 18 months that if we want to look at metrics and data, we're going to know much more, not July 1st of 2021, but July 1st of 2022. What do affiliation rates look like? I mean, we know that day schools in many areas actually increased because people weren't happy with how some of the different public schools were managing or some of the other private schools were managing schools, and the day schools were able to, by and large, figure out, because they're just smaller and a little bit more malleable, come together. I'll be curious in a year and a half if the students that enrolled now, are they still in the schools? Are we seeing the same number at Minyan when we are more physically in person and it's not as easy just to wherever you are, turn on your computer? I don't have the answer to that. I would hate to lose it, but I don't know.
Rabbi Hirsch?
I have no idea. I hope that for some people, their not only observance, but their mindset has become more attuned to the religious perspective on the world, which is, there's a really fascinating, I'm not going to go into this, it's a long Talmudic passage, but there's a really fascinating passage about Shimon Bar Yochai and his son, who were socially isolated for 12 years in a cave.
Yes.
They come out and they set the world on edge and they go back into the cave for another year. Bar Yochai comes out with a much more sympathetic view of human struggle, whereas his son still is angry and wants to destroy everything. And so that's really a model of how we'll come out of this period. There are two options. The Talmud tells us this already, thousands of years ago. One option is we will come out with greater sensitivity as to what are the hardships that can be bestowed on people immediately, and that when suffering occurs, the suffering is distributed unevenly. And that, as the Talmud says, if God was kind to us, then our task is to be kind to others. That's the religious mindset. I hope that many people, and many more people than otherwise would have, because of by virtue of this experience, will come out with a desire to want to do good in the world and to help relieve suffering, and to be more intent on doing that than they did before. Whether that'll happen or not, I don't know. And with respect to the Jewish community, I'm always worried. I always worry about the Jewish community, in particular the non-Orthodox Jewish community, and their discipline and their affiliation. I am convinced that we cannot sustain the Jewish community without synagogues at the heart of the Jewish community, and therefore the health of synagogues is a barometer and a predictor of the future health of the Jewish community at large. And therefore, having been away from this discipline, which is hard to instill from the outset in non-Orthodox Jews, having been away for a year and a half, 2 years, whether we can flick a switch and people will come back, or will they have gotten used to in the meantime not being in synagogue? I worry about the effects of that.
Yes, and I think that worry expands beyond the conservative and reform movements. I think it also impacts on the Orthodox movement, but I'd rather have Rabbi Weinstock address that. But first, please try to answer my question as to whether you think that observance, where is it on the observance scale? Where are we? And but that impact moving forward, I think, is really key.
When you initially asked the question whether it increased, decreased, or stay the same, my initial reaction was increase. In terms of quantity, there are many more opportunities, many more outlets for learning and worshiping and experiencing and the like. Within a synagogue context, we're not necessarily able to track the members' engagement by their coming to us because they're going elsewhere. They're trying other synagogues and the like. So as the professional synagogue may be a little nervous about that in terms of Jewish community, there's more. I think going forward, a lot will depend on what type of engagement that was. And when you asked the question, I thought about my own personal religious experiences during this time. I love Friday night when I wasn't in shul and was just with my family. It had a certain level of spirituality that isn't always felt in synagogue, and not only because I'm a rabbi. There was the opportunity to engage, my kids, the family that's just in the living room, in ways that don't exist otherwise. And so I think that if the increased engagement was, hey, that's interesting, it's in front of me, I can do something else while I'm participating, like who knows how many people right now are doing the same thing, then that will complicate things. At the same time, I do think there are those who grew religiously and spiritually from that increased level of participation. So there will be challenges, but I'm optimistic that we can build upon it.
I'm curious, and thank you, Rabbi Weinstock. I'm curious, Rabbi A and Rabbi Hirsch, is there anything that you're willing to share, that you individually, from a spiritual perspective, have taken upon yourself that you didn't do prior to COVID, Rabbi Ain?
Well, I always was at Minyan. I now enjoy Minyan a lot more because of the way I gave myself and my community not only permission, but a framework to do our daily minyan. I've added certain practices. I now teach at the end of our minyan every morning. I teach a Mishnah every day. Every day, if there's somebody marking a yard site, we have people share who they're saying Kaddish for. I know that should just be sort of an obvious thing that's done, but I don't think everybody does that. And I also start with a spiritual intention. So before we say, page 10, please rise, we center ourselves in prayer. And that has been very meaningful, I think, from the community, but I always find that if it's not meaningful for me, it certainly won't be meaningful to them. So that's been one thing. And the other, while, not technically religious, is that I've really taken up exercising. And that has been something that I am far from a gym rat. I do it at home, but saying to myself, I try to take care of everybody else, but I need to make sure that I'm healthy too. And especially both my whole family had COVID in November. And since then, it's been one of those things that I've been trying to exercise daily. So you can all hold me accountable. I've exercised every day since January 1st and it's March 23rd. And I did it this morning. So I'm trying that. And that to me is actually spiritual practice.
All right. Rabbi Hirsch?
I don't think my observance has changed. It's an all-consuming task to be a congregational rabbi.
Indeed.
And so, the discipline to do that hasn't really changed. During some months, some vehicles of interaction have become virtual, but the preparation is the same and the delivery is the same. But I tell you what I do think has impacted on me. I have participated in such sorrow. I've been part of such trying times with families that I do think I've become one, more sensitive to our role as spiritual leaders, and two, I've seen reactions that have inspired me, that are so dignified and that mindful of Jewish history, that as bad as things are, and I don't want to minimize the terrible pandemic and its impact, but we've actually seen worse in Jewish history. And to see members of our community pushing forward with such resolve, with such resilience, with such dignity, is a highly inspiring moment. It's a spiritual moment for me, and it kind of brings me back to the full arc of Jewish history and what we've endured, what we've pushed through to allow us to be where we are today.
Right. Well, I think that's a good way to segue into our Passover part of our discussion, speaking about Jewish history and what we've endured and the slavery in Egypt. But before we do so, what have I done differently? That'll be the segue. Is that there is a tradition to read the book of the Song of Songs, the Megillah of Shir HaShirim, on Friday evening. And when did I start that? I started that last Passover, last Pesach. I was home alone. My wife was in Israel for an entire year with our family there, unable safely to come back here. I could not get there. So I had a full 12 months. She came back yesterday. So she's with me for this Pesach. But my maternal grandfather used to be with us. My grandparents used to be with us for Pesach, my mother's dad, and he would say, there's a tradition to say Shir HaShirim at the end of reading the Haggadah, reading our liturgy for the Seder. So I started then, and now every Friday night, usually because of work, I don't get it to do it before I pray the evening service, but before I eat the meal, Shabbat meal, that's when I say Shir HaShirim. So again, Shir HaShirim and Pesach and the Seder. Last year's Seder, again, I know what my experience was. So what are some of the reflections that the three of you have about the Seder last year as we move towards a Seder this coming Saturday night? Rabbi Weinstock?
So the Seder last year was actually a reprieve and a relief from what went into getting ready for Pesach. I spoke with a number of colleagues, never felt busier going into Pesach than last year with the technical details of adjusting to a virtual community while trying to assist in the very real physical needs that people have over Pesach. And it was whether it be delivering packages to people and dropping them off in buildings and learning the routines of different buildings and how you can get past to the elevator, not to there were all these logistics that were never part of Pesach preparation. There are plenty of logistics that go into Pesach, but it was different. And last year we had the Thursday, Friday, Shabbos, right. Which creates the 3-day Yom Tov experience, and it was never more of a relief to have a 3-day Yom Tov because those logistics took a back seat to dealing with crisis, an emergency or two, but only being able to celebrate. So I think that, but for me, and it's a recurring theme that the Seder was with the immediate family, which is a very foreign experience for me and my congregational rabbinate, which for almost the entire time involved at least one community Seder, and sometimes another Seder which had 20, 30 people around the table to assist those in need. And so there was the beauty of family, and I guess, the sound of silence that permeated the days of the holiday, and that was my experience.
Wow. So I got to reword the question for Rabbi Ein and Rabbi Hirsch, and it's the Manish Tana question. Manish Tana Seder Hazeh Mikol HaSedarim. So Rabbi Ein?
So I think last year, the plague that we were all focused on was COVID. Little did we know that 6 weeks later, we were about to enter into a whole new realm of plagues that others in our community knew and know, and that is the plagues of racial injustice. But that many of us, I imagine, even on this Zoom call, were not as tapped into. And with the murder of George Floyd and the ensuing conversations over the year, and now last week, the murders in Atlanta of our Asian American community members. I think one thing about this Seder and this year has been, we've all been tuned to the same channel. Now, we're not all watching the same channel. You've got people watching the channels that speak to them, but generally we're speaking about the same news stories. And that is different than any other time I remember in at least my history as a rabbi. So how we integrate Judaism and the world. And I mean, I've always tried to do that, but this year everyone's having the same conversations, or at least I hope everybody's actually having the same conversations. So when we sit down this year, I think there's all these layers, the specific layer of as individuals, where are we emerging as free right now? Like, what pain have we been in? What Rabbi Hirsch was speaking to earlier. Then there's the Jewish community question, because at the end of the day, Pesach is a quintessential Jewish narrative, and I don't want to take away from that. And if we talk about the story of going from slavery to freedom, I don't think we can ignore what has gone on this year in the United States. And we need to be able to talk about that in the context of our Seders and see how are we grappling with that? Where have we come and where do we still have to go? And what voices have we not yet listened to that we need to ensure get spoken?
Well, Rabbi Hirsch, you spoke before in response to the previous question about other oppressive periods in Jewish history. So how does this impact on your Passover, your Pesach, and your Seder as it'll come about this coming Saturday night?
Well, first of all, for the community, for the second year in a row, unlike Orthodox synagogues, we use technology on festivals and Shabbat, and so we'll be doing a communal Seder, which we would otherwise be doing in person. It's a big highlight and people love it. We usually have 150 to 200 people at the communal Seder, and so we might actually have more at this virtual communal Seder. And then, so from the synagogue's perspective, it's what we normally do, except for it's not going to be in person; it'll be virtual. From a personal perspective, we will. And by the way, Michael, I didn't know the full story of you being alone for a full year. Lot tov heyot adam levado. So I am so delighted to hear that your wife returned just in time for Pesach this year.
Indeed, thank you.
Yeah. So for the second year in a row for us, it's all virtual. I have my father doesn't consider himself elderly, and if he sees this recording, he'll probably be offended, but he is 94 and a half years old. And we all, of course, always get together on Pesach. And for the second year running, he's going to be alone, and it's going to be virtual. And so there's something sobering about that, and also puts in perspective what the rabbis say is the central passage of the Haggadah is, in every generation, every Jew should see themselves as if they were personally redeemed from Egypt. And the question is, how can you feel as if you're personally redeemed from Egypt when you're sitting in, the land of freedom? You're not deprived of anything really that is important in life, and it was always a struggle. So to be able to put yourself in the position of being redeemed, having been enslaved and be redeemed. And so I do think that for us in the Jewish community, mindful of everything that Rabbi Ain mentioned and all that we've gone through in the past year, that we should use this opportunity. We hopefully this will be the last year of this. By the time we get to Pesach next year, the pandemic will be in the rearview mirror. And so the question is, what do we do with all of this, and how do we come out of all of this? And I do hope that not only personally, but the Jewish community resolves to consider itself as if it is trying to help lead American society to a better place. And I think that if we can do that, at least more than in comparison to what we might have done had there been no pandemic, then that might be a silver lining of this pandemic.
Very interesting thought. My late father, Rabbi Israel Miller, was the founding chairman of the American Conference on Soviet Jewry. That was before the National Conference on Soviet Jewry. And he would tell us that he was the one who instituted the matzah of hope. So at the table, and we used to read in English and in Hebrew, the wording pertaining to the Jews in the former Soviet Union. This was the matzah of hope. Is that something that we should be hopeful for this year of identifying in some way? And let me just put that one on pause and throw in the makot, the 10 plagues. In fact, we really don't even know what the dever plague was. I think it's called pestilence in English. What is, might dever have actually been something akin to a plague like we're experiencing now? So the notion of taking a look at the plagues, looking at the matzah, drinking the wine, what does this all mean for those of us who are going through some very, very difficult times, Rabbi Weinstock?
So yeah, I think that obviously starting with last year and continuing this year is the discussion about COVID. Which plague is it? Is it a 9th plague? Is it an 11th plague? It's an unprecedented way of looking at it. Rabbi Hirsch said we've been through worse. At the same time, when you're experiencing it, you sometimes put those blinders on and don't think it can get any worse, but then it does. But we have, I think that one of the elements of the Seder that has resonated with me, and I think it speaks to your question. We say at the Seder, "V'hisha amda lavotenu v'lanu," and this has stood for us and our ancestors. What's the this? Mm-hmm. And there are all sorts of interpretations, but V'hisha amda is, according to many traditions, recited while raising a glass. Right. And we continue to be able to celebrate, to celebrate. There's a simcha on a holiday, there's joy, and so we continue to celebrate regardless of the distractions. That element of that which is represented by the holidays and the rituals and the observances, that continues regardless. And I think that there's a lot of power to that type of a sentiment, which can then be filtered and addressed in all sorts of different ways in terms of how many people in so many different aspects, so many different ways have been the heroes. Back last Pesach, it was the 7:00 cheer. It's sad that goes away because the heroes are still there. It's just the cheering has stopped. So I think it's the Pesach in particular is a good opportunity to think about and evaluate where we've been, but also recognize that just like in the past, we're still going to go very far.
Yeah, and indeed, I think that one of the themes of the Seder night is redemption, Geulah, Gaal Yisrael, Redeemer of Israel. Do we feel, Rabbi Hirsch, some redemption through the vaccine, through medical science, what, again, this evolution of experience throughout history, but particularly we're living through history now. Is there a uniqueness to the Seder that impacts directly on our experience during the pandemic, Rabbi Hirsch?
Yes, I think that adversity tends to propel invention and creativity. If you look at and more sensitivity and greater appreciation for what you have, right? So if you look at what has been accomplished in the world, not only at the devastation, but also it's a miracle of science that these vaccines have been not only produced, but distributed now, and they're tens of millions within the span of a year. And I would add parenthetically, because this has been part of some discussion in the Jewish community, Jews embrace science.
Mm-hmm.
And if the science, and Jews embrace life above all else. And so if the science says vaccines are lifesavers, not only for you, but for other people who you're likely to interact with, then Jews encourage taking vaccines, period. But to look at the miraculous scientific accomplishments that, by the way, will not only bring us out of this pandemic, but through the inventions and innovations of resolving this pandemic will then create a whole new scientific sphere that will allow us to cure other diseases. That's something to be very, very appreciative about and grateful for.
If I can jump in, not just the science in isolation, but the science is represented with the tremendous partnerships between the pharmaceutical companies, the manufacturing companies, the different governments. There were so many different component parts of this that has now made it work, that we've seen this. Is it perfect around the world? Absolutely not. Are there so many people we need to get vaccinated? Yes, yes, yes. But even that some of these major drug companies were willing to put their egos aside for the sake of humanity is something that should not be understated. I mean, it's to me, that's also a miracle.
Yeah, well, there are many miracles to be celebrated, and the question is how we celebrate them. So we know that we have the Haggadah, we know that we have the liturgy, and that'll take us from beginning to end, but we also have traditions. So are there any, for the two questions here, are there any traditions that are unique to your respective families that you would like to share with our viewers, A, and B, is there potentially any tradition that you're going to be adopting because of COVID, of the pandemic, that you're going to be instituting this year or last year and this year? So two questions. Share something, please, with us about your family experience. And I see a broad smile on Rabbi Ain's face. We're going to start with Rabbi Ain.
Okay. The one that we've been doing now for a number of years is that we do the beginning of the Seder on our couch, and we sit on our couch and we sit around and we lean and we're comfortable, and then we journey to the dining room table, which is about 3 feet away from our couch. But just that act of getting up and moving is experiential. It's fun. I'm always a little nervous that the red wine's gonna spill on the couch or on the rug, but such is life. But it's something that I'm thrilled that we've instituted even in a New York City apartment, and that's something that will continue.
Before you move on to the second part of the question, I just finished the tractate of Psachim in the Daf Yomi, in the Talmud page a day, and that was the tradition back in ancient times. So they would actually have the full Seder on couches, as opposed to the comfort, we put in quotation marks, that we have in our chairs. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, so I would say the new tradition, I'll speak about this not with my family hat on, but with my rabbinic leadership hat on, because the first one I answered as a family member. that we are doing a virtual communal Seder this year. And I'm giving this away, that what we're going to do for the Magid is we've instituted a conversation of sorts between the rabbinic intern, David Chapman, the cantor Malachi Kanfer, and I, where it's like a talk back, where there's a number of questions that we're all going to be responding to. And that's how we're going to be doing a component of the Magid, that it's not just reading what it says in the Haggadah, but elevating, taking the ideas and the themes of the holiday to really model for the community that it's not just about what the words say, but about the questions asked. So I'm looking forward to sharing that this year.
Wow, sounds exciting. Rabbi Hirsch?
Well, I mean, maybe my colleagues here might be a little surprised. We're very orthodox about our Passover Seder. We actually, it's a bit blasphemous to change anything for us. It's like, that's the whole point. Year after year after year is to do the same thing. So we tend not to be, in our own personal Seders, we tend not to be, innovative or creative, except we always take time to try and synthesize the basic principles of the Haggadah and of Passover with what's happening in the world. My father is a rabbi, as you know, Michael, as well. And so he always gives a kind of an overview of what's happening in the world and why it's important to us. And the issues, they're similar, but of course, 12 months have gone by since the last Seder. And so we focus on specific things. That I think is useful for us, for sure. But for anybody listening, it is important at all times to tie ritual for the purpose and for the sake of tradition, which in and of itself is important, to action. So the more opportunities we have to tie tradition to resolve, what are we going to do, is useful, and I think very Jewish, by the way, too.
Mm-hmm. Wow, thank you. Rabbi Weinstock.
So at our Seder, there's always the custom of utilizing ritual objects
too, right?
Yes, we have a very reformed Seder. We like to change it up, but we always bring out some of the ritual objects that have been in the family for generations, and specifically, tell their stories so that we connect it to the past. In particular, I have a kittel that I use at the Seder that I inherited from one grandfather. The Seder kittel full of all the wine stains that won't come out and the like. And a Kiddush cup that was used at another grandfather's bris over 100 years ago in Germany. So it's really carrying it through, that kind of a journey, that not only the spatial journey from the living room to the dining room, that it represents the distance traveled, but also over time. In terms of a custom for this year, I keep coming back to the idea of plagues. We talked a little bit about that before. The expression that we read in the Torah when the plague of the firstborn struck the Egyptians, "Ein bayit asher ein sham met." There was no house that was spared. And I haven't exactly figured out where it will come in, but sometime when there's a discussion of the plagues and the spilling out of the water, the idea of just addressing that issue of whether it be the COVID suffering or other challenges out there. Right. That's something I'm leading into this year.
Thank you. We're going to be wrapping up, and I really wanted to turn to all three of our guests and ask them just to share one uplifting word. I think what Rabbi Weinstock just said at the tail end, as opposed to the beginning of his response, was something dealing with the realities of the challenges that we're facing today, which are quite stark. But please share with us, all three, please share with us just an uplifting word, a word of encouragement as we're about to step into this most very, very special season of our year. The Chag HaAviv, spring has sprung, and we're looking forward to growth as opposed to the opposite of that. So as I started with Rabbi Ein, Rabbi Hirsch, Rabbi Weinstock. We'll start with Rabbi Weinstock, Rabbi Hirsch, and we'll end with Rabbi Ein. Rabbi Weinstock?
So I think that there's always progress. There's progress from one point to the next. The idea of redemption. We're supposed to experience what our ancestors went through the Exodus from Egypt, but that was redemption. And to imagine that feeling, Rabbi Ein talked about the vaccine and redemption and people coming together, from different corners and different areas of endeavor that we're able to make it happen. To me, that is a symbol, the fact that we are still here and that there is growth. To me, that the Seder, often we sing L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim, next year in Jerusalem. And there's a certain Eretz Yisrael, Israel focus, but that is the call to redemption. That's why Eliyahu Hanavi appears at the Seder. There's this idea that we are looking forward to being better and growing from wherever we are right now. That's where we expect to be going forward.
Thank you so much. Rabbi Hirsch?
I would just remind all of us what we already know will come out of this. Judaism is hope. That's that hope that tomorrow will be better than today, and that we have a role in ushering in better days. And we know that will happen. I hope and expect that by the High Holy Days, we'll be able to gather as a community. And my colleagues know there's a tradition to recite a special blessing, Birkat HaGomel, coming out of a very dangerous situation. So I hope that by September, we'll be able to recite that together as a community on the High Holy Days. And if not in September, there will be a time within the next 12 months or so that we'll be able to say to ourselves, we made it through, we're on the other side, and we still need to march forward to Sinai and to a better world and take more responsibility, but we've left the oppressive side behind.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Ein.
So I'll answer with what I referenced earlier as a parent of an upcoming bar mitzvah and representing so many of the parents in the world today who are having their kids go through this. Despite it all, despite the changes in how we might celebrate, this past Friday, we received my son's talis that got shipped from Israel. And on Sunday morning, we went and bought him tefillin in the same place that my husband bought a talis when he was becoming bar mitzvah. And I think that there's something really beautiful about that as hard as it is, and things have been really hard, and we shouldn't tell people that it hasn't been hard. We can look for those moments of joy and tradition, and we should hold on to them and elevate them. And I'm doing that on a personal level, and all of us are doing it on a communal level. And it's an honor to be in conversation together.
Thank you. Likewise, it certainly has been, and this really was a moment of joy. I think of the Seder, particularly the one last year, when we have a tradition of opening up the door and welcoming in Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Hanavi. I was hopeful I'd open up the door and find actually people who would want to come in to join me for my Seder. They weren't there. But spiritually, I know that I was surrounded last year, and thank God have a family member at the table this year. All three of you are indeed our family here in New York, and what a pleasure it has been, beyond a pleasure to have spent this past hour together with you, talking about where we are today and talking about where we're going tomorrow. And thank you so much. A Chag Kasher v'Sameach. And let's have the emphasis particularly on the simcha, on the joy. What a special delight it has been to have had Rabbi Rachel Ein, Rabbi Ammiel Hirsch, Rabbi Elie Weinstock together with us on Community Relations Corner. Wishing all who are observing a happy Passover. Again, a Chag Sameach to all, to our non-Jewish friends. A happy Easter and a holiday season. Let's hope that this holiday season will usher in a true redemption for all humanity. Shalom, shalom to all. Thank you.
Thank you.